Are you in a season of changing yourself or accepting yourself? I not only would encourage listeners to ask themselves that question, but ask your team members that question.
Welcome to 5 Minute Founders. If you're interested in hearing today's full conversation, you can check us out on YouTube at Jump 450. But for right now, we've only got 5 minutes. My guest today is a TEDx speaker and the founder and CEO of the leadership development company, Wild Leaders, Dr. Rob McKenna. Let's jump right in. What is your business and what pain point does it solve for?
My business is Wild Leaders, and WILD stands for whole and intentional leader development. So it kind of has a double meaning because it's also this idea that every person, every leader has a wild story as well. I love that word wild. I always, when you name your business after a word, you start to hear the word everywhere. And when people use it, they say, man, that's wild. Like, what do people mean by that when they say that? And it's like, and I looked up the definition at one point. It means something is like surprising and unexpected, but yet somehow has truth in it. And we started, the official version of Wild launched in about 2010. And the original vision was to transform the way that we develop leaders, and the idea that we could develop them as whole people and also leverage like what's literally the century of research on leader and organizational effectiveness and performance, but also on development. And so I set out to build a tool and a way to actually do that kind of thing. I didn't want to speak about great ideas in whole leader development. My hope was actually to build a process and a way to do that. And so that's been a really important piece of this business even today. As we started off investing in developing leader capacity. I will say that one of the things that has changed more recently is that I think, how you set out to do one thing and you realize you're actually doing something else. So when we set out to invest, I developed this platform of tools. You take the best psychology and you build this set of developmental assessments that could live inside an organization and be a way to develop leader capacity and team capacity. What we discovered over the years, that there was a core outcome emerging from that investment. And the core outcome was trust. As people were beginning to understand each other more accurately and effectively and understand themselves and share that awareness, and using, by the way, some really basic principles around competence and purpose and whether they had support or not, and motivation, and giving them a way to have those conversations, is that they started to trust each other, which drove our business today. So much of our work is around building whole and sustaining trust into the strategic moment that organizations are facing.
I've heard you say before that every great change in the world comes with a deep need and a leader. What deep need do you see most companies suffering from right now, and what type of leader can fulfill that need?
One of the biggest issues, so we've been doing a lot of research on trust lately. We have what's called the Wild Trust Index, and it's a way for organizations to assess the levels of trust at the personal, the team, and then the organizational level, which includes that leadership level at the level of their systems. And we talk often about in organizations that have a low degree of organizational trust. So there's not, even at the sort of the functioning level, we call it the shell, where the outer shell could be strong as an organization, but let's say that's not strong. And so there's not a trust in the overall entity or the leaders or the culture. And then if you also don't have trust at the team level, so you can imagine, you could have an organization where organizational trust might be low, but actually people trust their teams and their managers. That does occur. And we call that islands of trust. And Matt, I'm just giving you a little glimpse into the data. When you talk about the need, is that in our initial glimpse, and we're going to be publishing a state of trust report in early 2025, because our sample size is just growing exponentially. But half of the organizations right now, according to our data, live in what we would describe as the jungle of trust. What meaning, I think of jungles as pretty chaotic, and they're dark, I don't know what's around the corner. And when I look at that data, and I can we map the data out, what I see is people. These are human beings who are functioning within organizations where they have a high level of distrust in the organization, maybe a high level of distrust in themselves, and a high level of distrust in their team members. And I've been there. I think most of us, I don't know if you have before in the past, but it's like, this is a horrible place to live and work. And so when you talk about that, so then what does it mean to move out of that jungle? And so one of the deepest needs, and I'm kind of going to walk backwards now for just a moment. You know what the oldest story in the research on leadership is? And this is a century of research now on this very reality, is that as organizational leaders, we must be both builders and gardeners. And I use that metaphor to describe what there was study out of the University of Michigan, the Ohio State. There were studies that came out of there around two fundamental things that every leader must do They must attend to the systems, the operational structure, the tasks, like the things that you can see. And then they also have to attend to what was traditionally called consideration, which is basically people, right? And the challenge with people is that those things are invisible. It's what people are thinking, needing, and feeling. Because you can have the best operational system in the world, but if people don't trust each other, if they don't know themselves, if they aren't learning, best operational system in the world will rust and break down. It will clunk up. And so when you ask that question about like that need is that so often in culture, we see this, and there's been interesting writing on the polarization of topics. And so what we tend to do is we swing back and forth. And right now, in the last few years, and I'm not saying this is bad, so I hold this tension together is where Wild Leaders enters into this equation, but is that we tend to swing from one side to the other. And more recently, we've swung away from sort of a mechanical approach to business to focusing a lot of attention on things like emotional intelligence or, empathy or things like inclusion or belonging. These are all critical pieces, but they aren't enough on their own to create a healthy and high-performing organization full of people whose well-being is escalating. They have to have both. And so when you ask that question, my answer is to build up a generation of leaders who understand and can move toward the tension between both the building part and what I describe as tending to that fragile garden of relationships that is also necessary for us to be well as we build.
That's all the time we have for today. If you're interested in hearing the rest of my conversation with Dr. Rob McKenna, you can check us out on YouTube at Jump 450. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.